And then later, it said the word of God came, the word of the Lord came to Jeroboam, but then later he was an evil king.
Yeah, so kings weren't necessarily all good or all bad. Sometimes they went back and forth. As we're looking at this article about the first temple, we see a lot of different kings listed and a lot of evil that's going on there, but there are some times when maybe they started out good and became evil. We'll look more specifically at that in a few minutes.
Why didn't God kill Manasseh?
Manasseh, yeah, he was really bad, wasn't he?
He let him reign for 55 years. I don't know why
Yeah.
he killed him.
That's a good question. Someday you can ask him. Why, God, why didn't you get rid of Manasseh? Sometimes God just allows evil to go on. Just like in Romans 1, it talks about how God simply let people go. If they want to do evil, he just lets them go. Lets them do it.
I thought it was cool how it was celebratory. Marching the battle and singing confused.
The singing,
Yeah.
yeah. That is interesting. The singing confused the enemies. Well, I mean, you're going out to battle, all of a sudden all these people are singing. That might confuse you. I don't know. Lexi?
I thought it was interesting how some of the kings were not
That is remarkable too, isn't it? Sometimes you have a good king, and then the king, his son, turns out to be really evil. And sometimes the other way around too, right? Sometimes there was an evil king followed by a really good king. And we'll see that. We're going to look at a chart later that lists all that for us, and we'll see that. Katie?
I thought it was weird when it said Uzziah reigned only 1 year before he was killed. Then you look at Queen Athaliah, and said when she found out that her son Uzziah had been assassinated, she assassinated all the remaining princes of the David house.
Yeah, so she tried to wipe out all the princes of David, all the descendants of David. Yeah, evil woman. Now we're told all the time, if women just ran the world, it'd be a lot more peaceful. Aren't we told that? Joel?
I thought it was weird how many different things they worship. Like they worship Baal, they worship God, and like sometimes it was in between like 30
They
years.
should have known better,
Yeah.
right? That's the thing. They're the one people on earth that had the Word of God, that had a history of knowing God, and yet look what they did. Robbie?
The past kings, why were their son, like the wicked kings, why were their sons good kings?
What that tells us, and vice versa, what that tells us is that it's not just environment that determines how a person turns out. I mean, that's kind of what's preached today. Well, this person did bad things because they had a bad childhood or whatever. Don't you hear stuff like that?
Mm-hmm.
People make choices. There are people that were raised by an evil king, but they chose to serve God. And there are people that were raised by a king who served God, and they chose evil. That's because it's their, and same thing happens in families today. So people make their own choices.
I just never noticed that they had a queen.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
that's
thought it was all kings.
usually we don't think about that. Yeah. Especially the kind of queen she was.
It was cool to look at how there were different rules and some were evil, some were good, and how the God-fearing leaders they had changed the country. It just says how much a good leader affects.
How much a good leader and how much an evil leader can affect a country too. Yeah, it really is remarkable how the people follow the leader. There's a reason why we have that game, follow the leader. That's what happens.
Wouldn't it be funny if you had a good king and then you were still alive when the bad king came, but you had another good king and a bad king? All within the span of 30 years, and you were still alive for all four of them, and yet you kept seeing the change over and over again.
I'm not sure. You don't mean funny, ha-ha. You mean sort of unusual funny. Right? It would not be fun to live in that kind of...
I think it'd be like, would you keep...
It would be
changing every
awful.
time?
So wouldn't it be awful to live in a time when you're going from good to bad to good and bad? Yeah.
Wouldn't you change every single time?
Well, I think there are some people that didn't. One of the things Elijah, I remember, gets discouraged about. He says, I'm the only one left. I'm the only one serving you. And God says, come on, get a grip. There's 7,000 people that haven't bowed the knee to Baal. Baal. Yeah. So there are always more people than what you think. You think you're all alone, but there are others. There are others whom you don't know. Okay, another observation.
I didn't realize how a lot of the things, like, with the Romans, they would try to kill people in the line of David.
Yeah.
And like how that has to do with Jesus' time.
Yeah, because the Messiah has to be in the line of David, and if everybody gets killed, there wouldn't be no more. Yeah. And sometimes it was pretty close. All right, good. Those are really good observations. I can tell that you guys read the article and got something out of it. Let's review a little bit, and then we'll proceed with looking at the next step here. Let's see. Who was the first king of the United Kingdom? Everybody say it together.
Saul.
Who followed Saul?
David.
Who followed David?
Solomon.
And after Solomon, we have a division. I'll explain that for you right now. First of all, when Solomon was ruling, you know that he became very wealthy. He had a lot of trade going on, had a lot of fortified cities, chariots, horses, all this stuff. But he also had high taxes. When you've got a king, you're going to have taxes, and he kept raising taxes. And that's something that God said would happen. You know, and he continued to take young men and young women from the people to use either in his army or as servants, to farm his land, all that stuff. Remember, that's something that God said would happen. And yet the people, when Samuel was there, said, we still want a king. Well, it happened under Samuel. So Samuel had an advisor named Jeroboam who said to him, look, we need to cut taxes. You're really hurting the people. And Solomon did not do it. And so when Solomon died and his son Rehoboam came to the throne, it was thought, well, maybe now here's the time. We've got a change in leadership. This is a good time to make a change in the taxes. And so the elders of the people came to Rehoboam and said, look, you need to reduce the amount of taxation. Now, the smart thing for him to have done would be to listen to the elders. What are elders?
People that knows the name.
They're the older, wiser people, right? People with gray or white hair. They're the wise ones, right? He should have listened to them. You have a comment about white hair?
No, I have a question.
What?
I thought Solomon was the wisest man.
You know, he was, and yet he still made mistakes. So I don't. I mean, he also had 1,000 wives or whatever.
What?
So that's not very wise either. So it's hard. I'm not sure if he's the wisest man who ever lived and the mistakes he made. Just think how worse off everybody else is. So I'm not sure what the explanation for that is. I wondered about that too. I don't have an answer as to how he could have done so many dumb things and still be the wisest man. But anyway, it's getting back to our story. I shouldn't say story, to the history. So Rehoboam did not follow the advice of the elders. Instead, he did what many of you did. He asked his friends, what do you think I should do? Oh, I want to ask my parents. I'll ask my friends, because they're so wise about everything. They make such good decisions themselves, right? So that's what he did. And his buddies are all kind of living off of the royal palace, in the royal palace. They've got it easy. You know, they're the recipients of all this good stuff that's going on. And so they say, oh, no. You can't reduce taxes. Then the people will think you're weak. Instead, you need to raise them even more. Show them how tough you are. That you're going to take charge. And you're not going to listen to what anybody says. And so that's what he did. Well, when that happened, the former advisor, Jeroboam, led basically a revolt by exiting. He led 10 nations to leave the nation of Israel. He called their 10-tribe nation Israel. And that left Rehoboam with only basically one tribe, the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Benjamin stayed with him too, but Benjamin was really small. So that divided the kingdom into two parts. the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah. Now, there's a way for you to remember where they are. Alphabetical direction. So, if we look down the map, usually if we're going, if we're reading something, if we're not going left to right, we're going top to bottom. So top to bottom, I comes before J. Israel comes before Judah. Right? So that's easy enough. Now, the names of the kings are pretty similar. So how do you keep them straight? Well, Jeroboam comes before Rehoboam. J comes before R. So that should make it easy. The only problem is the capitals don't work. You have to remember that Jerusalem is the capital of Judah, and there you got J and a J. And Samaria is the capital of Israel. And what's the second letter of Israel? Maybe you can remember it that way. Or just learn it, I'm not sure which. But you need to know those things. All right, so Israel and Judah, Jeroboam, Rehoboam, Samaria, and Jerusalem. Any questions to this point? All right, let's look at some of the characteristics of these two nations as they proceed, Israel and Judah. Israel was larger. You can see they took some of the territory over here on the eastern side of the Jordan, and wealthier. They have access to the trade routes, to the sea. Judah is kind of landlocked. They're smaller and poorer. Now, you don't have to know all these. I'm just giving you an overview so you understand some of the differences. Israel had a mixed population. So there were people that were not Hebrews living in Israel. So they're kind of mixed ethnically and then religiously too. Other religions were there. In Judah, there were more Hebrews. The predominant part of the population were Hebrew people. Because of their location, they're more exposed to outside forces. So they've got nations all around them that have an influence on them. And Judah is isolated. You know, they've got the Philistines are all along the coast, so they don't get out that way. And this area down here is mostly wilderness, so not too many people want to come up that direction. They've got the Dead Sea here, so they're kind of isolated geographically from any outside influences. Israel has instability spiritually and politically. And when we look at the list of kings, you're going to see that. I'll wait for comment until we get there. Judah is stable in their dynasty because there's only one dynasty, and that's the family of David. Understand that the word dynasty indicates a different family. When we look at Israel's kings, we're going to find a number of different dynasties. So it's always changing hands between different families. But there's one dynastic tradition here, and that's the Davidic line. All the kings are descendants of David in the nation of Judah. Israel enjoyed the advantages of trade and commerce from the coastal route. The route that comes from the Mesopotamia over this way, remember the Fertile Crescent that comes down, and the route comes right along this coast of the Mediterranean, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, right down into Egypt. Well, Judah's not there. The route comes through Samaria, and there's another route on this side that also Israel would have a connection to. So, and not to mention too the being on the coast of the Mediterranean. So they had a lot more opportunity for trade and prosperity that way. All right, any comments or questions about what you see here?
How much land is this? Like,
Well, remember the whole land of what we call Israel today, at least, which would be most of this, is about the size of New Jersey.
okay.
That's the closest thing I can think of.
So, would you be able to see across that lake, maybe?
The Dead Sea,
Or yeah, that's it.
and parts of it, definitely down here you can see across it.
Oh,
I think in the widest areas, I don't think you can.
okay.
Might depend on the weather. But on a good day, remember when Moses died and was buried? Oh shoot, what's the name of the mountain? Nebo, Mount Nebo. I think, yeah, Mount Nebo. And that's up in here someplace. I don't remember exactly. It's along the Jordan, near the Jordan River. On a good day, from that mountain, you can see all the way to the Mediterranean.
Oh wow.
Now, the day we were there, it was so hot, and you know when it gets hazy, when it's hot, and you couldn't see very far. But Moses was able to see the land, but you can even see the Mediterranean.
So it's really not that big.
So it's not that big.
So it won't take you that long to drive across it.
No. Now we would, on our tour, we would drive from down here all the way up to here, and I'd see on the map, why are we going from one end of the country to the other? It'll take all day. No, just a couple hours, maybe. Depending. And they planned it that way because they knew what the traffic was like and different. And so we would go here to here to here, all over the place, instead of thinking, well, let's go to every place down here first, and then, no, they had it planned out because they knew what the traffic was like, and it wasn't that far.
Well, that means there wouldn't really be that many people you still can have. Like how many?
Today or then?
Well, like what do you think like the population was?
I don't know. We had millions of them coming into the land initially, and then multiplied from there. But I don't even have a guess of how many people would have been living there at this time. Maybe.
Now, how long were you like on your trip?
We spent around a week in Israel, I think. So it was approximately a week in Egypt, and then, well, about 2 weeks between Jordan and Israel. So it's probably about a week and a half in Israel. Yeah, really great trip. Enjoyed it immensely. Okay, let's talk about the king who first caused this division. What was his name, everybody? Jeroboam. Okay, a couple of you got it. Here he is. Here's Jeroboam. And we're going to look at the sin of Jeroboam. Jeroboam, when he set up the kingdom of Israel, realized that he didn't want people going down to Jerusalem for all of the religious festivals. Why? Why do you suppose he wouldn't want people going to Jerusalem?
Crowd control.
Well, he doesn't care about crowd control in Jerusalem.
It's in Judah.
What?
It's in Judah.
Because it's in Judah. So why does he care about that?
But they're his enemies.
Yeah, they're kind of his enemies, but so, you know, let's sneak in, sneak back out. What might be the problem for him if if all the people, all the male adults of Israel are going down to Jerusalem for Passover?
Then the other armies could attack him.
Well, he would leave him vulnerable to other armies. That's a good point. Hadn't thought about that.
No one to work.
No, they'll be the same anyway if they're going to festivals in their own country. If they came to Jerusalem and were worshiping there, they might have their heartstrings kind of tugged toward, you know, we really need to be part of where Jerusalem is. You know, maybe we made a mistake in leaving. Maybe we should rejoin. So he doesn't want to lose the loyalty by having them continually going to Jerusalem year after year. So what does he do? He gives them worship centers in Israel. Now, instead of going to Jerusalem, you can go closer to home. And he establishes one of them all the way up here in the north in Dan, and the other one down here in Bethel. Now, both of those have a long history of religious activity, especially Bethel. Does anybody know what the word Bethel means? What is Beth? I think we talked about this before.
Isn't it B in the alphabet?
It's what?
Is it B in the alphabet?
It is, though it also is a word. It's the word for house. And what's El?
Elohim.
That's an abbreviation for Elohim, so it means house of God. It was first named that, if I remember correctly, by Jacob. Remember when Jacob was running away from Esau, and he put his head on a rock at night to sleep, and he had a dream about angels going up and down on a ladder to heaven. He called that place Bethel, because he knew God was with him. All right, so this is a significant place. Notice, it's not that far from Jerusalem, so anybody that was going down thinking they're going to go to Jerusalem, hey, wait a minute, you don't have to go to Jerusalem. We got a perfectly good place right here. And if you live up in this area, well, that's so far to Jerusalem, we'll just go to Dan. So what did he do there? Well, he established a pair of golden calves, one in each one, for worship. Now let's take a minute here to look at his sins and see what they really are. He could have taken his fears about losing control to God, but he didn't. Instead, he reformed, or this person says, no, he deformed the ordinances for worship that the Lord had given to Israel through Moses. What's he saying? This guy's saying that God gave them how to worship. He said, here is how I want you to worship. And Jeroboam is saying, I don't care what God says, we're going to do it my way. We're going to do it differently. This is a lesson for us. Jeroboam erected 2 shrines located in Bethel and Dan. He placed golden calves in those shrines. Does that remind you of anybody else? Aaron, yeah. He established new festivals, shrines on high places, a new priesthood in place of the Levitical priest. So he's revamping the whole system. He did not subscribe to what's called the regulative principle of worship, and that means following the way God says to do it. He trampled God's holy ordinances for worship underfoot. In his obvious sins of idolatry and overthrowing God's ordinances for worship, there is embodied another great evil. He presumed to subordinate the worship of God to the interests of the state. He made the church a tool of the state. In other words, government was running religion. And it should never be that way. The government should never be in charge of religion. That's why we have our First Amendment to the Constitution. It wasn't to keep Christianity out of government. It was to keep government out of Christianity. You follow? Mm-hmm. That's what our founders understood. That's what Jeroboam didn't understand. And instead, what's happened today is our government has been involved in establishing a state religion, a government religion in our country. And it's exercised through our public schools, and it is promoted by our media, and that is the religion of secular humanism. That is a religion. You'll learn more about that and understand the times eventually, but they even say themselves in the Humanist Manifestos that they are a religion. And they are the official, or the unofficial, I should say, religion of our government schools. Yes?
If there's the First Amendment, why do schools still not allow kids to have Bibles?
Because they misunderstand. They intentionally misconstrue and twist it to mean something that it didn't mean. You've probably heard, we're getting off topic here, but you've probably heard of the separation of church and state. Everybody uses that as a reason why kids or teachers can't have a Bible in school or can't pray in school, can't have a prayer before a football game, all those kind of things. The phrase separation of church and state, to the surprise of many, is not in the Constitution. It occurs in a letter that President Thomas Jefferson wrote to some people that were concerned that the government was going to establish a church. And these were Baptists who didn't want to be under a state church. And he said there is a wall of separation. Then he goes on to explain, not that the church can't influence the state, but that the state can't have control over the church. That's what he meant by it. But the Supreme Court in 1963 or 4, somewhere or 2, ruled that that meant you can't have God in school. You can't have prayer. You can't have people told to pray. They even said you could be voluntary, but what happened is once that got out, people took it to an extreme that the Supreme Court didn't even intend and said, well, you can't have prayer and you can't have Bible reading. And it's had a tremendous impact on our nation ever since. I recommend for you a book by David Barton called, I can't remember what it's called, about prayer. It has the word prayer in it. But it talks about what has happened in the country since prayer was taken out of schools. But anyway, Jeroboam did the same thing. He thought the government needs to control the worship. All right, so here he is offering a sacrifice for the idol of the golden calf. And as we see here, that when he was engaged in offering incense to this golden calf, a prophet from Judah appeared with a warning message from the Lord. Jeroboam attempted to arrest the prophet, and his raised hand, as he's pointing at the prophet, dried up. And the altar before which he stood fell apart. So God brought judgment on him right away. And some of the lessons we have here are that civil rulers, sometimes even elected leaders, often use the power of the state to make Christ's church their tool. Here's some examples. Henry VIII of England made himself head of the church in order to get a divorce. Hitler forced churches to become instruments of Nazi propaganda and control. I don't know if you know, he even changed the reciting of the Lord's Prayer to reciting of the prayer to the leader, him. What shall we say when churches with no outside coercion voluntarily make themselves agents of cultural and political agendas and movements? In other words, what about our churches today that oftentimes allow secular culture to come in and dictate what we do rather than following what the Word of God says? And we're not even being forced to yet. All right, so let's look at the kingdoms then. The southern kingdom of Judah. I'm sorry.
First.
Yeah, that's right. The southern kingdom of Judah, here's a list of the kings. And here is a letter indicating whether they were evil or good. All right, so you read about this in the article. Now, it kind of helps to put it all together like this, I think. So what do you notice there, looking at it this way? More evil than good. Did you get that impression from the article? Probably. What else do you notice? Just like some of you pointed out before, there would be a good king have an evil son, evil king have a good son. It's pretty hard to string more than two together. Here are 3 good kings in a row, 1 partial good. But mostly it's all evil after one another, right? You have 20 kings here. All right, we look at the northern kingdom of Israel. Here's a list of those kings. What do you notice here?
There's no good or evil.
Yeah, why is that? They're all evil. Right, Robbie? So there's no point in putting an E down there because E is over all of them. Notice these dark ones, the boldface. That indicates a change in dynasty. That means probably most of the time that the king before that one was killed and a new family took over. Here you see a couple in a row. Zimri got rid of Elah, became king, then Omri got rid of Zimri. Any other comments? Here's looking at the whole picture. This chart shows 20 kings for each. It's certainly close to 20 for each, although the kingdom of Israel was a shorter time period. Here are the prophets before Israel's captivity. These are prophets to Israel, trying to get them to repent. So you recognize a lot of those names, I'm sure. Here are the prophets after Israel's captivity, which takes place down here, the fall of Samaria. And you recognize those names too. And these are prophets to Judah to get them to repent so they don't follow the same pattern as Israel. But then they are captured also, and these are the prophets that are there after Judah is taken into captivity by Babylon. And you can look through there and you can see a number of those. Some of those are during Babylonian rule, some of them during Persian rule. And then the final prophet of the Old Testament is John the Baptist. Wait a minute, you say. He's in the New Testament. Yeah, but he's in the Old Testament economy, the Old Testament way of doing things. It's not until Jesus Christ dies and rises from the dead that the New Covenant, the New Testament, begins. So even though the books are in the New Testament, what happens in them still can be considered part of the Old Testament because they're still following Old Testament procedure and Old Testament law. So here we have 44 kings, 22 prophets. And here are the kings of the United Kingdom, and here it is divided. The one prophet of the United Kingdom was Samuel. Any questions or comments? All right, during this beginning of the divided kingdom, we have a pharaoh from Egypt by the name of Shishak, who invaded Israel and forced Rehoboam to yield enormous tribute. We find that in 1 Kings 14, that he attacked, carried off the treasures of the temple and treasures of the royal palace. He took everything, including the gold shields that Solomon had made. In 2 Chronicles 12, it gives us even more detail. He had 1,200 chariots, 60,000 horsemen, a bunch of troops from Libya and Upper Egypt, the Cushites, and so on. These are inscriptions on the wall of the temple at Karnak that talk about this invasion. Okay, so one thing you need to remember there is Shishak, or The Egyptians call them Shawshank invaders. Okay, so we had 50 years of fighting between Israel and Judah, and you don't need to write this down. I'm just trying to give you an overview of things here. Then there was 50 years of alliances between them and other countries. And then we have the Jehu dynasty. Jehu and his descendants ruled for about 100 years. Then we have the fall of Samaria in 722 BC when the Assyrians take them captive. Now, before we get to this point, I want to look at one more important king, and that's Ahab. You know about Ahab and Jezebel, his wife from Sidon, who brought in Baal worship to Israel, and people followed it. Elijah was the prophet that confronted them, had the contest on Mount Carmel we've talked about before, when God sent down fire, and Elijah killed over 400 prophets. Here's something that's been found: it's the seal of Jezebel. And it'd be nice to take time to look at all the different items on here, but we can't do that. But this certainly demonstrates, from a historical standpoint, her existence. All right, as we look at the kings of Israel, we come down to Omri. Omri is important because there are outside documents outside of the Bible that talk about Israel being the land of Omri, even. So he was a pretty powerful king. He had treaties with other nations around that are mentioned as well. After him comes Ahab, that evil king. And then Jehu has quite a string of descendants that rule after him before we get down to the end when Israel is taken captive. The judgment comes through a new civilization that arises. Well, not entirely new, but it's the Assyrians that arise on the scene, and they are the ones that come into Israel and capture them. We're going to have a quiz tomorrow over the land of Canaan. And don't forget, you also have your book reports due for tomorrow. Question?
We didn't finish like all the notes, like this whole section didn't finish.
Well, that's next.
Okay.
That's
we'll
not
have
Canaan.
it.
That's Assyria.
Okay.
What happened to all the other tribes of Israel?